This occurred several months ago. I've been a Lyft driver for a few years, and I typically work late shifts. There is a trade-off between the better tips and the calmer roads. You occasionally hear a story that stays with you, and not in a positive manner. I had always considered myself cautious. I've had my share of bizarre passengers, but nothing, I mean nothing, even remotely matched the strangeness of what I'm going to tell you. That night was the primary reason I put a dashcam, because I didn't have one at the time. It began quite normally, just me and the strange noises my car made now and then. Despite its wear and tear, my 2005 Volvo is incredibly dependable. The streets were literally empty, which I liked, as I mentioned before. I received a request from a local convenience shop just around 2 in the morning. At first, it seemed innocuous, but for some reason, I had a strange gut feeling about it. Have you ever had a strange feeling that you can't quite put your finger on? As I drove up, that's exactly what hit me. I found out why I was feeling that way before I ever saw the person. I was pulling up to a closed convenience shop. There were no cars in the lot, and all the lights were out. I noticed him as I drew nearer. In order to obtain a decent view of him, I made sure to drive quite slowly. Wearing a tattered hoodie that appeared to have been out of the washing machine for years, he was pacing outside the store. There was a real hole in the sleeve, and I'm not joking. He moved erratically, as if he were unable to remain motionless, and he kept looking over his shoulder as if he believed someone was after him. He was right on, if I had to guess. I probably ought to have simply canceled the ride and left. I didn't even hover my finger over the cancel button. For whatever reason, I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without a word. As soon as I removed my foot from the brake, I felt regret for my choice. He is different from most individuals, who either stare out the window or scroll through their phones. He simply sat there and stared at me via the rearview mirror without blinking or turning his head. I made an effort to avoid staring back, but I couldn't help but look him in the eye a few times. He appeared somewhat irate, which was also rather unnerving. I put on the radio to break the silence and tried to ignore him. He yelled at me to turn it off as soon as the music began to play, though I can't even recall which station I turned on. His voice was deep and a little raspy, and I could tell he was a smoker right away. That kind of caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel a little bit. I resisted the urge to look at him in the mirror and just did as he said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. We drove in quiet for a while, and I remained silent. Perhaps he would simply sit there in silence until we reached a stop, I reasoned. At least that's what I hoped for. Then he started talking. The exchange seems to have happened yesterday. If I ever picked up someone I shouldn't have, he asked. I was affected hard by that question. I chuckled awkwardly and answered, well, I hope not. He didn't respond to my attempt to keep it light. I couldn't hear him, so he just leaned back and murmured something to himself. He then went on to talk about how he used to drive for Uber but quit because some jerk stole some of his belongings from his car. I was unable to understand everything he said because he was slurring his words a little, but I generally understood the main idea of the story. While he was telling me the story, I glanced in the mirror a couple of times and noticed that he was grinning the entire time, which was really unnerving. A typical individual wouldn't grin when discussing such a topic. In closing, he said, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." I was captivated by that comment. I began to see him not just as a crazed drug user, but as a threat. I couldn't do much about it, unfortunately. My heart began to beat more quickly. My mind was racing, but I managed to keep my eyes on the road. I looked at the GPS, concentrating on the location as if it were a lifeline. However, the man was unsure when to quit talking. He continued to babble on about things that were either unimportant or completely unimportant. To be honest, I was unable to keep up. After a while, he began to apologize to someone, but I doubt it was me. He started implying that he was a nasty person and that he had just done something terrible. I didn't mean it, he said repeatedly, interspersed with a few desperate sorry yes. I was afraid he would do anything if I answered, so I didn't. I was not going to find out what he had done or what he was capable of. He awoke from his murmuring daze just a few minutes before his stop and screamed at me that I had missed a turn. Even though the GPS indicated that we were on course, I slammed on the brakes out of anxiety, but I didn't miss it. I complied with his request to pull over. By then, my hands were trembling. All I wanted was for the nightmare to end. I put the car in park, and headlights came on behind us. It belonged to the cops. I silently prayed and watched as it moved slowly down the street, passing my car and its beam for a moment. Like he was trying to hide, the man in my back seat slouched down. He was sleeping nearly flat on my back seat with his eyes closed when I turned to look at him. Trying to keep my breathing calm, I quickly turned my head back around before he noticed me. For a long, uncomfortable time, he remained in that posture. I considered asking him to go, but I changed my mind. At last, he raised his head and informed me that I was fortunate. He opened the door of my car and drove off before I could take any action. After that, I ended up calling my shift short. I was so rattled up that I had lost the desire to drive. I didn't realize how hazardous the scenario I was in until a few weeks later, when I discovered something on my phone. A news item claimed that the night I picked up that passenger, there had been a robbery at a convenience store. I had picked that guy up 2 blocks earlier, knowing that I was only inches away from a dangerous criminal who might have hurt me if he had so desired makes me sick. Regarding this, I'm a little afraid to call the police. For a variety of private reasons I won't discuss, I try to stay away from law enforcement. I doubt that my report would be of any use at all. In any case, I'm far more careful about who I allow into my car.